the ballroom froze when a millionaire's fiancée laughed at a little boy's handmade gift, shattering his fragile heart. In that instant, the man who had everything faced a choice: protect his son and the nanny who loved him, or cling to status and power. What he chose would shock everyone. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Damien Blackwood had built his empire brick by brick, deal by deal, standing tall among the giants of high society. He was the man people pointed at with awe and envy, the millionaire who carried power with the same ease others carried a glass of wine. His suits were tailored to perfection, his words calculated with precision, and his presence demanded silence the moment he entered any room. But beneath the polished steel of his exterior was a heart quietly burdened with grief. Years ago, he had lost his wife, the woman who had stood by him long before fortune crowned his name. The tragedy had carved a scar into Damien's life, leaving behind not just loneliness, but a son who carried the echoes of that pain. Ethan Blackwood was 8 years old, a boy with big brown eyes that seemed to hold questions he could never bring himself to ask. Since his mother's passing, the once lively child had grown quieter, his smile even rarer. Damien did everything money could buy: therapists, tutors, grand toys, vacations to glittering shores. Yet nothing could coax Ethan back into the light the way his mother's touch once had. It was Alina who changed that. Alina Marquez had arrived 3 years ago, answering the position of live-in nanny after Damien's staff admitted they could no longer reach the boy. She was not glamorous like the women Damien usually met at society events. She was soft-spoken, with warm eyes and a kindness that seeped into every word she spoke. Where others tried to bribe Ethan into happiness, Alina gave him patience. Where others tiptoed around his grief, she sat with him in silence until he slowly, like the sun warming frozen earth, Ethan began to thaw. He laughed again, though clumsily. He painted again, though clumsily. He began to dream again, though carefully. And whenever Damien caught glimpses of it, his son's guarded smile peeking through in Elena's presence, something unspoken twisted in his chest. Tonight, however, was supposed to belong to someone else. The chandeliers in the Blackwood ballroom glittered like constellations. Crystal glasses caught the golden light. Gowns shimmered in sequins and silk, and the air hummed with violins and whispered gossip. It was Damien's engagement party, a night meant to celebrate his forthcoming marriage to Vanessa Sinclair. Vanessa was everything high society adored, stunningly beautiful, dripping in designer labels, daughter of an old money family with connections that spread across the globe. To the press, it was a match of power and prestige. To Damien, it was practical. Vanessa admired his wealth, respected his influence, and was eager to carry the title of Mrs. Blackwood. Love had not been part of the bargain, and Damien, still haunted by his late wife, had convinced himself it didn't need to be. But Ethan felt differently. The boy hated the flashing cameras, the endless chatter of strangers, the empty smiles that never reached their eyes. Yet tonight, he had carried something close to his chest, something he had worked on for days in his little corner of the world. He had begged Elena to help him with the clay set Damien had bought him, molding and reshaping until his small fingers ached. He had wanted it to be perfect, though Elena told him perfection wasn't what made something beautiful. What mattered was the heart, and Ethan, with all the courage he had scratched into the small, lopsided pendant the words, "For Mama Elena." Now, as music swelled and laughter echoed, Ethan tugged timidly at Elena's dress. She knelt instantly, her smile softening the extravagance around them. He opened his palm to reveal the little pendant, uneven and cracked, strung on a simple thread. His voice trembled as he whispered, "I made this for you." For a moment, the world seemed to hush. Elena's eyes filled not with embarrassment or dismissal, as Ethan secretly feared, but with a warmth so tender it could melt stone. She clasped the pendant as though it were the most priceless jewel in the room. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice shaking with emotion, "this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." She slipped the thread over her neck, letting the uneven clay rest proudly against her dress. Then she pulled him into her arms, pressing a kiss to his temple, whispering, "Thank you, my sweet boy." Damien saw it all from across the room. He stood among investors and senators, nodding politely as they praised his latest acquisition, but his eyes were drawn elsewhere. The sight of his son, pressed against Elena's chest with a smile so fragile yet so real, struck him harder than any deal he had ever closed. His jaw tightened as he realized that, in a room filled with diamonds and silk, the most valuable treasure was the bond forming before his eyes. Vanessa, meanwhile, sipped her champagne with a practiced smile, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing in Damien's heart. She had no idea that his attention was not on her glittering gown, nor the grandeur of their engagement, but on a small clay pendant resting on a nanny's chest, and the love it symbolized. The music swelled, the lights glistened, and the night carried on in glittering luxury. But in the midst of all the gold, Damien knew something had shifted, something he could no longer ignore. As the evening stretched on, Damien found himself replaying the moment over and over. The way Ethan's eyes had lit up when Elena had accepted his gift. The way Elena had looked at the boy as though he were the only soul in the universe. It gnawed at Damien in ways he couldn't fully articulate. For months he had told himself Vanessa was the sensible choice, the safe choice that would restore order to his carefully curated world. Yet every time his son recoiled from Vanessa's attempts at affection, Damien felt a pang of unease. Tonight, that unease sharpened into something undeniable. Elena, standing quietly by Ethan's side, was radiant in her own way. Not because of her dress, a modest gown compared to the glittering ensembles of the wealthy guests, but because of the authenticity she carried with her. Every smile she offered Ethan was real. Every word she spoke to him was filled with patience. She wasn't here for power or reputation, she was here for love, a kind of love Damien himself had once believed he was incapable of finding again. But Vanessa noticed something Damien had not intended to reveal. Her eyes followed his gaze across the ballroom, narrowing slightly as she saw where his attention lingered. Though she kept her laughter light and her expression smoothed, a shadow flickered beneath her polished exterior. Vanessa Sinclair was not a woman who tolerated being overshadowed. Meanwhile, Ethan remained tucked beside Elena, clutching her hand as though it were a lifeline. He was no longer the shy boy shrinking from the crowd. For the first time in years, Damien noticed his son's shoulders straighten, his expression relax. The pendant bounced lightly against Elena's chest, catching the golden light, and Ethan's face shone with pride. When Elena leaned down and whispered something in his ear, Ethan laughed, an unguarded, genuine laugh that turned several heads nearby. It was a sound Damien hadn't heard in years, not since his wife's laughter used to fill their home. His heart clenched painfully, the memory of what he had lost colliding with the sight of what he was dangerously close to overlooking. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the orchestra playing with precise elegance, but all Damien could hear was the echo of his son's laughter and the whisper of his own thoughts, asking a question he didn't want to answer. Had he been building his life around appearances and power, while the true essence of family stood quietly in front of him? He excused himself from the circle of businessmen and approached, though cautiously, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace between Elena and Ethan. Standing a few steps away, he watched as Elena adjusted Ethan's jacket, smoothing the fabric with the gentleness of a mother. Her voice was soft, her expression filled with a tenderness Damien had longed for his son to know again. For a fleeting second, their eyes met. Elena's gaze, warm and unwavering, caught Damien off guard. He saw no calculation in her, no hunger for wealth or status, only honesty. It rattled him more than any hostile takeover ever could. Vanessa's laughter rang behind him, brittle like glass. Damien knew she would not ignore this moment forever. But he also knew that something had already shifted deep inside him. As the night waned and the guests raised their glasses in endless toasts, Damien remained caught between two worlds. One glittered with status, the other glowed with love. And though the world expected him to choose the first, his heart whispered that his son had already chosen the second. The ballroom glistened under a canopy of golden chandeliers, each crystal reflecting the shimmer of gowns and polished shoes. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their bows gliding over violins, filling the air with practiced elegance. Waiters in white gloves moved silently between the crowd, carrying trays of champagne flutes that sparkled like liquid jewels. For Damian Blackwood, the night was meant to be a celebration. His engagement to Vanessa Sterling, a union that promised power, prestige, and the sealing of two influential dynasties. But as his eyes drifted toward the far side of the room, the heart of the night shifted. There stood Ethan, his small frame tense, his hands gripping something close to his chest. He had already presented the gift earlier to Elena, his nanny, but he clutched it again now, perhaps hoping to show his father's fiancée. The boy's face was pale under the ballroom lights, his large brown eyes filled with that same mixture of hope and fear Damian had seen so many times since his mother's death. Ethan wanted to belong, to be seen, to be valued. Vanessa's laughter cut across the music as she swept closer, her sequined gown shimmering like molten silver. Always aware of the eyes on her, she tilted her chin high, every step rehearsed to exude glamour. She spotted the small clay pendant in Ethan's trembling hands and stopped abruptly, curiosity flickering before disdain replaced it. "What is that?" she asked, her tone loud enough to draw attention. Her manicured fingers reached out, plucking the pendant from Ethan's hands before he could answer. She held it between two fingers as though it were something distasteful. This crooked little thing? Who made this?" Ethan's lips parted, and his soft voice cracked as he whispered, "I did. For Mama Elena." His cheeks burned red, his eyes glistening. The crowd nearby quieted, curious to hear more. Eflopin's laughter rang sharp, echoing against the marble walls. "You?" she said incredulously. "You made this? Oh, darling, it looks like something dredged out of a schoolyard trash bin. Look at it. It's chipped, uneven, and scratched like a child scribbled nonsense. And you actually call it jewelry?" The string quartet faltered for a moment, a violin squeaking slightly as the cruel words carried through the ballroom. Conversations halted. Guests froze, glasses half raised, turning their heads toward the confrontation. Ethan's small hands twitched before falling limp at his sides. His shoulders sagged, his fragile hope crumbling with every word. He took a step back, then another, as though trying to retreat from the daggered eyes and mocking laughter. Elena, standing just behind him, felt her chest tighten as though a blade had been pressed against her heart. She bent down, placing a steadying hand on Ethan's back. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice warm and tender enough to cut through the ice. "This is beautiful. You made it with your heart, and that is what makes it priceless." Her words drew a contrast so sharp that it silenced the few chuckles Vanessa's remark had provoked. Elena held Ethan's gaze, willing him to see only her, to remember only her words. His lip trembled, but he leaned into her touch, desperate. Vanessa, however, sneered. "Priceless? Please. This is hardly worthy of being in this ballroom, let alone around someone's neck. Damian, really, is this what passes as acceptable now? Your son parades cheap crafts like some street child." Damian's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching as he absorbed the words. He glanced at his son, standing there small and humiliated, eyes brimming with tears he fought to hide. Rage simmered beneath Damian's calm exterior, a fire that threatened to consume his carefully constructed composure. His son had offered something pure, fragile love in the form of clay, and this was the response from the woman meant to share his. The whispers began. Guests leaned into one another, murmuring about the spectacle unfolding at the heart of the engagement party. Some eyes glittered with cruel amusement, others with discomfort, but none dared intervene. The drama of wealth was a performance in itself, and the crowd hungered for scandal. Elena rose to her full height, her hand never leaving Ethan's trembling back. Her voice was calm, but carried through the silence with unshakable resolve. "With respect, Miss Sterling," she said, "a child's gift is not measured by polish or perfection. It is measured by love. And there is more love in this pendant than in all the diamonds in this room." A collective breath shifted through the crowd. Vanessa's face darkened, her lips twisting into a smile that was all venom. "Spoken like a servant," she snapped, always grateful for scraps. "No wonder he clings to you. You encourage mediocrity. This," she held up the pendant again for all to see, "is nothing but clay." "Clay, and you call it beautiful?" Ethan's body jerked as though struck. His wide eyes shimmered, and at last a tear slid down his cheek, betraying the storm inside. He reached forward with trembling fingers, trying to take the pendant back, but Vanessa withdrew her hand, dangling it just out of reach. "Don't worry, little boy," she cooed, mockingly. "We'll get you a real jeweler one day, not this childish nonsense." Gasps rippled through the guests. The cruelty was no longer masked. Even among the cold elite there were limits, and Vanessa had crossed them. Damien moved forward at last, his towering frame casting a shadow over the glittering cruelty of his fiancée. His voice was low but thunderous, restrained fury vibrating in every syllable. "Enough." The music had stopped entirely now. All eyes were on the family at the center of the ballroom, the millionaire, his son, the nanny, and the fiancée who had exposed more of herself than perhaps she intended. Ethan clung to Elena, burying his face in her dress, trying to disappear from the eyes of the crowd. Elena held him close, whispering soothing words, though her own eyes were wet. She kissed the crown of his head, murmuring, "You are enough, Ethan. You are more than enough." Damien's gaze shifted to Elena, watching the way she shielded his son like a lioness protecting her cub. Something inside him cracked, an ache so sharp it felt like revelation. He realized in that moment what kind of woman Vanessa truly was, and what kind of woman Elena had always been. The engagement party, meant to be a celebration of unity, had instead fractured into humiliation, whispers, and a storm of doubt that raged in Damien's chest. Above that storm, one truth blazed clear. His son had been mocked, his heart shattered, and the woman to shield him had not been his fiancée, but the woman society labeled as nothing more than a nanny. And Damien knew he could never see Vanessa the same way again. The ballroom hung in an unnatural silence, the kind that suffocates rather than soothe. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, their golden glow paling under the tension that thickened the air. Vanessa still held the pendant aloft, her hand glittering with rings worth more than some families earned in a lifetime. Yet for all the shine on her fingers, her words had dulled her luster in the eyes of many present. Damien's gaze was locked on her, cold and unyielding. The fury in his chest demanded release, yet years of corporate boardrooms had taught him restraint. His voice, when it came, was low but carried with the weight of a judge's gavel. "Vanessa, give the pendant back to my son." The command cracked through the tension like a whip. Vanessa's painted smile faltered, surprise flickering across her face. She had expected Damien to laugh, to perhaps scold Ethan gently for bringing something so inappropriate to the event. Instead, she found herself on the receiving end of his steel-edged voice. Still, pride refused to bow. She tossed her hair and let out a brittle laugh. "Darling, don't be absurd. I was only teasing. You can't truly want this?" Trinket paraded around as though it were worth anything. Within his heart. "Is worth everything," Damien said, sharply, his voice rising. Gasps swept through the crowd, unused to seeing him lose even a thread of composure. "Because it was made by my son, with his hands, with his heart. That makes it priceless." The room vibrated with murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, others looked away, discomfort etched in their faces at being witnesses to such a raw, unvarnished truth in a place meant for polish and pretense. Ethan peeked out from Elena's embrace, his small frame still trembling but his wide eyes fixed on his father. There was something new there, something he rarely saw in Damien's usually distant demeanor. Defense. Pride, love. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, Ethan saw not just a businessman in an expensive suit, but a father standing for his son. Vanessa's face hardened. She dropped the pendant onto the marble floor with deliberate carelessness. The sound of clay striking stone echoed louder than the quartet's earlier music. Ethan flinched, as if struck. The crowd gasped again, scandal spreading like fire. Elena knelt quickly, picking up the pendant before it could be further damaged. She cradled it in her palm as though it were gold, brushing the small scratches tenderly with her thumb. She looked up at Ethan, her voice a whisper meant only for him, but loud enough that silence carried it further. "See? It's still whole. Just like you, Ethan. No matter what others try to break, you are whole." The boy buried his face into her shoulder, the sob he had fought finally slipping free. Elena's heart ached, but she held him tighter, letting his tears soak her dress. Damien's fury ignited fully now. He turned to Vanessa, his voice clipped, every syllable sharp enough to cut. "You humiliated my son in front of an entire room. You took what was sacred to him and ground it beneath your vanity. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Vanessa bristled, her cheeks flushing under the weight of judgment. Not just from Damien, but from dozens of eyes now openly staring, whispering, condemning. Her mask cracked and venom poured out. What I've done is expose weakness. If this is the kind of sentimentality you indulge, Damien, then perhaps you're not the man I thought you were. I expected strength, refinement, a family that reflects the Blackwood legacy. Not childish crap. The insult to Elena sent another wave of shock through the crowd. A few gasps turned into outright mutters of disapproval. Some of Damien's business partners exchanged knowing glances, already calculating the damage this public spectacle might cause his reputation. But others saw something else. The raw humanity Vanessa lacked, the cold cruelty she wielded like a weapon. Damien took a step closer, his towering presence forcing Vanessa back. His voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. Do not ever speak of Elena that way again. She has done more for my son, and for me, than you could ever comprehend. Elena's eyes widened, her breath catching. She had never heard him speak of her with such weight, such acknowledgement. For years she had been the silent guardian, the one who tucked Ethan in, who shielded him from loneliness, who bore the weight of his grief. And now, before the world, Damien admitted it. Vanessa, cornered and humiliated, tried to recover. She forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. Really, Damien, are you listening to yourself? You're defending a servant over your fiancé? Over your future? Future, Damien said, his voice echoing like thunder, will not be built on cruelty. The words shattered the fragile illusion of their engagement. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some guests turned away, already certain they had witnessed the unraveling of a union that was never meant to be. Others stared hungrily, feeding on the drama, knowing the gossip would ripple through every elite circle by morning. Ethan clutched Elena tighter, sensing the storm, but also the shield that now surrounded him. Not just her embrace, but his father's sudden, fierce defense. Vanessa, realizing her position was crumbling, straightened her shoulders. Her voice dripped with poison. You'll regret this, Damien. Throwing away an alliance with me, with my family, for what? A child's clay toy and the affections of his nanny. You're a fool. Damien's response was measured but final. Better a fool with a heart than a man without a soul. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's painted smile faltered entirely, her mask crumbling under the weight of his words. For the first time she looked small, not because she lacked beauty or status, but because all her shine had been stripped away to reveal nothing beneath. With a final glance at the pendant in Elena's hand, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. The great doors slammed shut behind her, leaving a hollow echo in her wake. The guests exhaled collectively, whispers exploding as though the silence had burst open. Conversations flared, about the end of the engagement, about Vanessa's cruelty, about Damien's defense of his son and his nanny. Scandal had been birthed, and the night would be remembered for it. But in the center of the chaos stood Damien, Elena, and Ethan, bound not by diamonds or contracts, but by something deeper. Ethan lifted his tear-stained face toward his father, searching. "Daddy, do you really think it's priceless?" he asked in a trembling voice. Damien knelt, his polished shoes creaking as he lowered himself to his son's level. He cupped Ethan's small hands around the pendant, his own large hands covering them protectively. "Yes, Ethan, priceless, because you made it, and because it carries love." The boy's lips quivered, then stretched into a fragile smile. He leaned forward, throwing his arms around his father's neck. Damien held him tight, his eyes closing, as though silently vowing never to let such cruelty touch his son again. When he opened his eyes, they fell on Elena. She stood quietly, tears still shimmering on her lashes, the pendant safe in her palm. Their gazes locked, his filled with gratitude and something unspoken, hers with quiet strength. In that moment, Damien understood. This night had destroyed one future, but revealed another. The engagement was over, the scandal irreparable, but the truth stood tall. Vanessa's mockery had shattered illusions. Yes, in the fragments lay the reflection of what mattered most. family, love, and the quiet strength of the woman who had protected them both. The opulent music of the ballroom still floated faintly through the heavy oak doors, but in the private lounge behind them, silence pressed like a storm before lightning. Damian Blackwood stood tall, every inch of his commanding frame taut with restrained fury. His fiancée, Vanessa, lounged carelessly on a velvet chair, swirling champagne in her glass as though the humiliation she had just inflicted upon his son were nothing more than spilled wine. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Damian's voice was low, clipped, vibrating with anger he was barely containing. His dark eyes, usually calm and calculating, burned with a sharpness that unsettled even Vanessa. She raised one perfectly sculpted brow, her jeweled earrings catching the lamplight. "If you mean Ethan's little display with that trinket," she said with a dismissive wave, "then yes, I know exactly what I did. I saved us both from a spectacle. Can you imagine the photographs? And your guests whispering that the Blackwood heir gave his nanny, a dirt-stained pebble and called it a gift. We are not peasants, we are Blackwood." His jaw plouched. "That trinket, as you call it, was made by his own hands, with love, for the woman who has cared for him more than anyone since his mother died." He stepped closer, his voice roughening. "He gave his heart in that moment, Vanessa, and you crushed it." Vanessa's laugh was sharp, brittle. "He's a child. Children get over these things. You're overreacting. Besides, Elena coddles him too much. No wonder he clings to her like some fragile doll. He needs to toughen up, Damian. Do you want him to grow up weak, unable to handle the world we live in?" For a moment, Damian's breath caught in his chest. Weak, the word echoed in the hollow left behind by his late wife's absence, by nights spent holding a trembling boy who asked where his mother had gone. Ethan wasn't weak. He was wounded, and Vanessa had just deepened that wound with the cruelty of a blade. "You speak of him as if he were an obstacle to your ambitions," Damian said, each word measured but heavy with barely restrained rage. "He is my son, my blood, the only piece of me that matters more than any empire I've built." Vanessa rose then, her sequined gown glittering as though mocking his fury. She set down her glass and walked toward him with a feline grace, placing her manicured hand against his chest. "Darling, I know you love him, but love isn't enough in our world. Status matters, appearances matter. Our engagement is more than romance. It is strategy. My father's company, your influence, it all tied together. Do you want to throw it away because a child cried over?" Damian stared down at her, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had built his life on strategy, on deals sealed in cold boardrooms, on alliances that expanded the Blackwood empire. But standing here, hearing her trivialize the tears of his son, he felt something within him fracture. Beyond the door, in the corridor, Elena's quiet footsteps echoed. She had seen the way Ethan's small shoulders shook under the cruel laughter of the crowd. Without hesitation, she had slipped her arm around him, shielding him with her presence. Now, she led him up the sweeping staircase to the safety of his room. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered to the boy, clutching her hand. "You are brave. Your gift was beautiful, and I will treasure it forever." Ethan sniffled, his eyes still wet, his small fingers trembling as they held tight to hers. "But she said it was ugly," he whispered, voice breaking. Lena stopped, kneeling so that she was eye level with him, her hand brushing the dampness from his cheeks. "Listen to me, Ethan. Beauty is not about diamonds or silk. Beauty is love, and your gift was made from love, which makes it more precious than anything in this house." He blinked up at her, fragile but trusting. Slowly, his breath steadied under the warmth of her words. She gathered him into her arms and carried him into his room, her gentle humming calming him, even as she fought the ache in her chest. Back in the lounge, Damian finally peeled Vanessa's hand from his chest, his voice a low growl. "Do you even hear yourself? You mock a child's grief, belittle his love, and call it strategy? If this is what marrying you means, then perhaps I've been blind." Her eyes flared, the confident mask slipping just a fraction. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Do you know what's at stake? Without this engagement, the Blackwood Empire could lose half its partnerships. My father—" "I don't care about your father," Damian cut her off, his tone sharp as steel. "I care about Ethan, and if protecting him costs me every deal, every dollar, then so be it. Vanessa recoiled as if struck. For the first time, her certainty wavered. She had always believed Damien's loyalty to his empire outweighed any sentiment. Yet here he stood, willing to unravel it all for his son. The silence stretched between them, heavy, suffocating. Outside, the music swelled, laughter resuming as if nothing inside this lounge was crumbling. But Damien felt it, the walls of his future closing in, the choice that could no longer be delayed. And in the shadows upstairs, Elena pressed a kiss to Ethan's forehead, whispering the words Damien's heart longed to believe. "You are loved, you are enough." Damien paced the length of the lounge, his hand raking through his dark hair as Vanessa's shrill protests filled the space. "You're letting that nanny poison your mind," she snapped. "She's beneath us, Damien. You think I don't see the way she inserts herself? The way Ethan clings to her? She was hired help. Remember that." Venom in her words jolted him. Elena had never once sought power, never once overstepped. She had given Ethan stability, tenderness, a safe harbor after losing his mother. And Vanessa, the woman meant to step into that role, could not even muster kindness. "He will not allow you to insult her," Damien said coldly, his voice echoing against the paneled walls. "Elena has shown more grace, more strength, and more heart than you will ever understand." Vanessa's lips curled. "Heart doesn't build empires." His reply came like thunder. "Empires mean nothing if the foundation is cruelty." The words hung in the air, stark and irreversible. Damien knew then that his life was splitting down the center. On one side, the carefully arranged alliance that promised wealth and influence. On the other, the fragile but fierce love he felt when Ethan smiled in Elena's embrace. And for the first time in years, the choice felt clear. Vanessa's voice cracked, anger slipping into desperation. "You think society will forgive you, ending an engagement like this, humiliating me, humiliating my family? It will destroy your reputation. You'll be a laughingstock." Damien's gaze hardened. Better a laughingstock than a father who betrays his own son. Her breath hitched, a flush of outrage spreading across her face, but she saw it in his eyes, an unyielding resolve that no argument could break. Beyond the lounge, whispers began to stir, as guests noticed the prolonged absence of their host and his fiancée. Speculation hummed like restless bees, though no one yet knew that the gilded evening was unraveling behind closed doors. Upstairs, Elena sat beside Ethan's bed, stroking his hair as he drifted into a fragile sleep. She hummed the lullaby his mother used to sing, her voice soft as a balm. Watching him finally relax, his breathing even and peaceful, she felt a protective fire burn in her chest. She had promised herself she would shield him, no matter the cost. But she had also overheard enough of Vanessa's venom to know that tonight was a turning point. Damien could no longer straddle two worlds. For Ethan's sake, he would have to choose. In the lounge, Vanessa's fury finally erupted. She slammed her glass onto the table, shattering it, shards scattering like the fragments of their future. "If you walk away from this, Damien, you'll regret it. No woman like Elena will ever give you the power I can." His answer was quiet but final. "Power is worthless without love." The door creaked open as he left her standing amidst the shards, her gown sparkling like broken glass under the dim light. The corridor stretched before him, lined with portraits of ancestors who had built fortunes but left behind legacies of loneliness. He thought of Ethan upstairs, of Elena's steadfast presence, of the warmth he had seen when she held his son's trembling hand. That was the legacy he wanted, not wealth, not alliances, but a family healed and whole. For the first time that night, Damien exhaled, his decision solidified. The engagement was as good as broken. The whispers of scandal would follow, but he no longer cared. Ethan's smile, Elena's quiet strength, those were the only futures worth protecting. As he climbed the staircase, the muffled music from the ballroom faded, replaced by the steady beat of his own resolve. Behind one closed door, Ethan slept, his clay pendant resting on the nightstand, where Elena had placed it like a treasure. Damien paused outside, his hand on the doorknob, listening to the faint hum of Elena's lullaby within, and in that fragile, tender sound, he knew The life he wanted was not with Vanessa, not with cold alliances, but with the boy who called him father, and the woman who had shown him the meaning of love. The confrontation was over, but the true battle, the one for his son's heart, for Elena's trust, for a family reborn, was only just beginning. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Blackwood estate, but there was no warmth in its light. Damien stood in his study, staring at the front pages spread across his mahogany desk. Bold headlines screamed about the engagement party scandal, each paper competing to twist the story with sharper words. Blackwood heir humiliated by fiancé's outburst, one read. Another declared, Millionaire's party ends in tears. Photographs were even worse. Ethan's small face, pale and tear-streaked, Elena bent down to comfort him, and Vanessa frozen mid-sneer. Damien's jaw tightened as he shoved the papers aside. He had built his reputation over years of calculated decisions and cold composure, but in one night it had all been tainted. Not because of Ethan's clay pendant, but because of Vanessa's cruelty. Society might whisper about scandal, but Damien knew the real shame was how he had failed to protect his son from the very woman he had promised would become part of their family. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Elena stepped into the study, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing like the glittering gowns of Vanessa's world, but to Damien, she carried a dignity none of those women ever could. Behind her, Ethan lingered in the hall, clutching the pen Elena had tucked safely into his. He slept, Elena said gently. I stayed with him until dawn. He's calmer now, but he keeps asking if it was his fault. Damien's chest ached. He rose, brushing past Elena, and knelt before his son. Ethan, he said firmly, holding the boy's trembling hands. What happened last night was not your fault. Do you hear me? You gave a gift from your heart, and it was beautiful. If anyone was wrong, it wasn't you. Ethan nodded, faintly, but his eyes darted toward Elena for reassurance. When she smiled softly, he leaned into her side, burying his face against her. Damien saw it clearly, the unspoken trust Ethan had in her, the kind of bond no headline could destroy. In that moment, Damien made his decision. He would no longer allow Vanessa's name to be tied to theirs. Status, wealth, alliances, none of it meant more than his son's happiness, and the world would hear it from him directly. Prepare the main hall, Damien told Elena. I want the press here within 2 hours, every outlet, every paper. Her brows furrowed, but she gave a slight nod. Are you sure? He answered, his voice steel. It ends today. By late morning, the Blackwood estate gates were crowded with reporters and photographers. Expensive cars lined the drive, journalists shouting questions as they jostled for a position. Inside, the grand hall had been transformed into a press chamber, rows of chairs facing a podium draped with the Blackwood crest. Cameramen adjusted their lenses, eager for a statement that would ripple through society. When Damien entered, the room fell into expectant silence. He wore a dark suit, his posture commanding, his expression unreadable. For years, the press had painted him as unshakable, a man whose empire was built on precision and discipline. Today, they would see a different side. Thank you for coming, Damien began, his deep voice echoing across the hall. You've all seen the photographs, you've read the headlines, and you've speculated about last night's events. He paused, his gaze steady, daring anyone to interrupt. I will tell you the truth myself. The engagement between Vanessa Kingsley and myself is over. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Pens scratched frantically, cameras clicked. Damien's jaw set tighter, but his eyes softened when he continued. Son, Ethan, is my world. His joy, his trust, his innocence, they are worth more than all the power and alliances in this city. Last night, in front of many of you, he was mocked for offering a gift from the heart. That cruelty has no place in our home, and it will never have a place in his life. I would rather stand alone with my son than bind him to someone who sees compassion as weakness. The words carried weight, slicing through the air like thunder. Even the most hardened reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For once, Damien was not the untouchable tycoon. He was a father drawing a line in stone. The heavy doors at the back burst open. Vanessa swept in, flanked by her parents, her heels clicking furiously against the marble. Gasps rose from the press as she stormed forward, her face flushed with rage. "Damien, what are you doing?" she snapped, her voice dripping venom. "This is madness. Do you realize what you're throwing away? Do you realize what people will say?" "I know exactly what people will say," Damien replied, his tone ice, "and I no longer care." Vanessa's lips curled into a sneer. She pointed at Elena, who had quietly entered with Ethan to stand at the side. "It's her, isn't it? The servant. She's filling his head with lies, ruining everything we built. Do you think society will accept you if you throw me aside for a nanny?" The insult cut across the hall like a whip. Reporters leaned forward, hungry for the clash, their pens flying as though they might tear the page. Elena's shoulders stiffened, but she kept her head high, her hand resting gently on Ethan's back to steady him. Damien's expression hardened, his voice low and thunderous. "You will not speak of her that way. Elena has shown more grace and love than you ever have. She has given my son what you never could: kindness. If protecting that makes me lose the approval of society, then so be it." The room erupted in whispers, the spectacle unfolding like theater. Vanessa's fury burned hotter, but she faltered under Damien's unwavering stare. For the first time, the carefully constructed facade of her ambition cracked, revealing desperation beneath. "Damien," she hissed, lowering her voice, "you can't walk away from this. My family, our alliance, it means everything. Without it, your empire," Damien cut her off coldly, "was built long before you, and it will stand long after. But Ethan only has one father, and I will not betray him for the sake of appearances." With that, Damien turned his back on her and faced the press once more. "This chapter is closed. My son's happiness is my priority. That is all you need to know." Ethan, still clutching his pendant, lifted his head and looked at his father with wide eyes. For the first time since the party, a faint smile tugged at his lips. Elena's eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked back the tears. The photographers captured it all. The millionaire, standing tall, his son beside him, the nanny's quiet strength at their side, and the fiancé left trembling with rage. It was a story that would echo across headlines for weeks. But for Damien, it was the first step toward reclaiming his... Damien's words still hung in the air like a thunderclap, reverberating across the wide marble foyer of the estate. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every angle of the unexpected scene. For a moment, silence reigned, so heavy and taut that one could hear the faint rustle of silk dresses and the shallow breaths of the assembled reporters. Then the murmur began, low at first, rising like a tide. "A millionaire breaking off an engagement in public?" a voice whispered. "Choosing his son over a society alliance?" another gasped. "Scandalous. Absolutely scandalous." But there were other tones, softer, touched with admiration. "Courageous," one guest murmured. "He's protecting that boy." Vanessa's face, once perfectly composed, twisted with rage as she spun toward Damien. Her hands clenched at her sides, nails digging into her palms. "You can't do this to me. Do you have any idea what people will say? Do you have any idea what my father will do?" Damien's eyes, cold and unyielding, met hers without a flicker. "Let them say what they will. My son's heart is not a pawn on your chessboard, Vanessa, and neither is mine." Her voice rose into a shrill pitch, desperate and furious. "All of this, your empire, your connections, was supposed to grow with me by your side, and now you throw it away for a child's silly trinket and that servant clinging to him like some stray dog." Gasps rippled through the crowd, sharp as shattered glass. Every word she spat only revealed more of the venom within, and the more she spoke, the more the room recoiled. Even allies who once smiled at her with politeness now looked at her as though seeing her true face for the first time. Helen, who had quietly kept to the edges with Ethan, flinched at Vanessa's words. She held the boy close, shielding his small, trembling body with her embrace. Ethan pressed his face into her shoulder, muffling a sob he couldn't hold back. Her lips brushed his hair as she whispered, "Don't listen, my sweet one. Don't let her poison hurt you." But Ethan's small voice broke through, choked yet brave. "She's wrong, Papa. My gift was real. Mama Elena said it was beautiful." The room froze again. The boy's words, fragile yet ringing with sincerity, pierced through every layer of opulence and pride. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashing, desperate to capture the boy's tear-streaked face as he clung to Elena. Damien's chest tightened. He stepped forward, his presence towering over Vanessa, yet his gaze softened when it shifted to his son. "You're right, Ethan," he said, voice firm yet warm. It was beautiful, because it came from love, and no wealth, no title, no alliance could ever replace that. The words landed like a final verdict. There was no going back, no reconsideration. Vanessa's composure shattered completely. Her laughter came sharp and brittle. "You'll regret this, Damien. You'll regret humiliating me and my family like this. You'll regret ruining your future for a child," and Damien's expression hardened into steel. "The only regret I have is not seeing sooner who you truly are. Now leave. This estate is no longer yours to step foot in." Two security guards, discreet but ever-present, moved closer. Vanessa's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, someone who would step forward to defend her, to remind Damien of the power of her family name. But no one moved. Even those who had smiled at her at galas, praised her beauty in glossy magazines, now turned their faces away. Realization washed over her, stark and cold. She was finished here. With one last shriek, she spun on her heel, her gown sweeping angrily across the polished floor as she stormed toward the exit. Cameras followed her like vultures, snapping her retreat. The great doors closed behind her with a resounding thud, sealing her departure and the end of everything she thought she had seen. In the echo of silence that followed, Damien turned toward the gathering of reporters. His voice, calm but commanding, filled the space once more. "You can write what you will, but know this. No fortune, no alliance, no arrangement will ever outweigh the happiness of my son. If that costs me status, so be it. I would rather stand with love than sit upon a throne of cruelty." The words struck like a revelation. For years, Damien Blackwood had been seen as untouchable, a man of power, of ambition, of strategy. But in that moment, he revealed something far greater than wealth: integrity. And integrity, once revealed, cannot be ignored. The murmur shifted again, this time toward reverence. He chose his son. Chose love. Chose dignity. Elena's throat tightened as she held Ethan closer. She hadn't expected this, not in her wildest dreams, that a man like Damien would stand before the world and defy every expectation, every rule of his glittering world, simply to shield his boy's heart. Damien crossed the space to them slowly, every step deliberate, like a man shedding chains with each movement. When he reached Elena and Ethan, he dropped to one knee, ignoring the stares and the flashing lights. His large hand cupped Ethan's small back. "You are my pride, Ethan, never doubt it. And you, Elena." His voice caught slightly, rare for a man who always measured every word. "You are not a servant. You are the reason my son still..." Ethan lifted his head, eyes wide, glancing from his father to Elena. For the first time that night, a tentative smile flickered across his tear-stained face. The room, filled with glittering guests and relentless cameras, seemed to soften. Even the harsh glow of the chandeliers dimmed against the quiet radiance of that small, tender family moment. Reporters rushed forward with questions, microphones raised. "Mr. Blackwood, what does this mean for your business alliance with the Van Alstens? Mr. Blackwood, are you truly ending the engagement? Who is this nanny to your family? Is she the reason for all of this?" Damien rose to his full height again, his hand resting protectively on Ethan's shoulder. He met the crowd with the poise of a man who had weathered storms far greater than gossip. "This press conference is over. What you witnessed tonight is all you need to know. Print what you will, but understand this: love will always be stronger than fear." And with that, he turned, guiding Ethan and Elena gently toward the staircase. The cameras still flashed, but their backs, united, spoke more loudly than any headline ever could. Behind them, the buzz grew fevered, reporters already shouting over one another, editors texting furiously, headlines forming before the ink even touched paper. But none of it mattered, not to Damien, not anymore. Because as he led his son and the woman who had been his anchor through the chaos, he felt something break open inside him. A freedom, raw and frightening, but real. The freedom that comes only when a man finally chooses the truth, no matter the cost. The morning after Damian Blackwood's shocking announcement, the city seemed to wake with a different pulse. The newspapers, always eager for blood when it came to the affairs of the wealthy, carried his name across their front pages. Headlines in bold ink screamed phrases like, "Millionaire shatters engagement in public rebuke," and "From Harris to humiliation, Vanessa Cross cast aside." Yet more biting were the whispers that followed. Not admiration, not sympathy, but disdain. For Damian, it was a choice made out of instinct, a declaration of love for his son and a defense of Elena's dignity. But for society, it was an unthinkable betrayal of the rules that bound their glittering world together. A powerful union, a strategic alliance between two empires, had been thrown away, not for another heiress, not for another dignitary's daughter, but for a woman who folded Ethan's laundry and brushed his hair before bed. At a high-end cafe in Midtown, wealthy women in diamond earrings leaned over their cappuccinos, lowering their voices just enough to seem conspiratorial, while making sure they were overheard. "Can you imagine? Giving up Vanessa Cross for a servant," one whispered. "Just that," another replied, tapping her manicured nails against her porcelain cup. "The nanny is plain. Sweet maybe, but plain." What on earth could he be thinking? By the third day, it wasn't just idle chatter, it was ridicule. Damian Blackwood, titan of steel and shipping, undone by a clay pendant and a pair of kind eyes. Elena felt it most harshly. While Damian faced scandal with the unshakable poise of a man who had weathered hostile boardrooms, Elena was left bare to the claws of gossip. She couldn't walk to the grocery without catching fragments of muttered accusations. Elena had a bluntness. She had given her life to caring for Ethan, never asking for more than a fair wage and a safe place to belong. Yet now her name was dragged through mud as though she had engineered the spectacle from the start. The shame pressed heavily on her chest. One quiet evening, while Ethan was asleep and Damian was locked in his study, she sat at the small oak desk in her room and wrote a letter of resignation. Her hand trembled as she pressed pen to paper, each word both a wound and a release. For your reputation. For peace. When she handed Damian the envelope the next morning, his jaw tightened. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He could read resignation in her downcast eyes. "No," he said flatly. "Damian," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "You have given up everything, your alliance, your reputation, for me. The least I can do is step aside before I ruin what remain. Ethan he'll find another nanny, a proper one, someone no one will question." Damian's gaze hardened, yet beneath the steel was something warmer, something breaking. He stepped closer, his towering presence casting a shadow over her fragile frame. "Elena," he said, his voice low, almost fierce, "do you know why I ended that engagement? Because I saw my son's heart crushed by cruelty, and I will never allow that again. Do you know why I will not accept this resignation? Because you are not the scandal. You are the salvation. You are the one person who makes Ethan smile again, and I cannot let you go." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, unable to speak. From that day forward, Ethan clung to Elena more tightly than ever. The little boy who had once tiptoed through life with silence now found courage to smile more often, to slip his hand into hers, to whisper, "Mama Elena," without fear. She tucked him into bed, soothed his nightmares, and sat with him at breakfast while Damian read the papers in silence. The world marked, but within the estate walls, warmth flickered like a fragile candle in the storm. Still, Damian knew silence would not protect them. The rumors were multiplying, like snakes slithering through the tall grass, ready to strike. If he allowed them to fester, they would devour Elena's dignity entirely, and perhaps his son's fragile recovery as well. So he made a decision, bold, defiant, the kind of decision only Damian Blackwood could make without flinching. A week later, the Blackwood Foundation hosted its annual charity gala. It was an event that traditionally dazzled society. Champagne flowing, chandeliers glittering, gowns worth fortunes sweeping across marble floors. The city's elite arrived expecting a show. They whispered predictions of Vanessa's return, of Damian's apology, of Elena's quiet dismissal. But none were prepared for what awaited them. When Damien arrived at the top of the grand staircase, he wasn't alone. On his left was Ethan, in a miniature tailored suit, his dark hair slicked neatly to one side. On his right was Elena, wearing a simple yet elegant navy gown Damien had chosen himself, its cut modest but its grace undeniable. Her hair was swept up, her features soft, and though nerves trembled in her hands, she stood tall because Ethan's small fingers clutched hers. The crowd gasped, some scoffed openly, others exchanged scandalized whispers. But Damien? Damien stood with his shoulders square, his hand resting protectively on Ethan's back, his presence radiating unshakable authority. As the cameras flashed, he bent slightly toward the boy and the woman beside him, making it clear to the world, these were his people. This was his family. The room fell into a heavy hush as Damien, Elena, and Ethan descended the staircase together. The sound of Elena's heels clicking against marble echoed like a steady drumbeat, defying the tide of whispers rising around them. Some smiled in amusement at the scandal, others clutched at pearls, scandalized by the audacity. Yet beneath the gasps and murmurs there was also something else. A reluctant admiration for Damien's sheer boldness. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't explaining, he wasn't asking permission, he was declaring. The master of ceremonies stammered as he announced their arrival, his voice breaking in disbelief before correcting himself. Mr. Damien Blackwood, his son, Ethan, and Miss Elena Hart. The name rolled through the crowd like a wave, followed by more murmurs. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but Damien tightened his grip on Ethan's shoulder and subtly brushed his hand against her back, steadying her, as though to say, "Stand tall, you belong here." They walked together to their table, placed deliberately at the center of the ballroom floor. Not hidden in a corner, not sheltered from sight, but under the crystal chandeliers where every eye was forced to watch. A society matron leaned toward her neighbor and whispered just loud enough, "The audacity! Bringing the nanny to a gala meant for royals and tycoons. He's lost his mind." Elena caught the words. She lowered her gaze, wishing she could disappear, but Ethan squeezed her hand. His little voice whispered, trembling but brave, "Don't listen. You're with me." The strength of that small assurance steadied her more than Damien's commanding presence ever could. Dinner began. Waiters poured champagne, set silver trays of delicacies before the guests. Conversations turned sharp and cutting, every phrase barbed with innuendo. But Damien remained calm, answering only when necessary, never letting his composure crack. Halfway through the evening, the chairman of the foundation approached their table, holding a microphone. "Mr. Blackwood," he began, his tone polite but edged with curiosity, "would you like to say a few words tonight? Our guests are eager to hear from you." The invitation was no mere courtesy. It was a test, a stage on which Damien would be expected to stumble, to falter under the weight of his scandal. Damien rose slowly, adjusting his jacket. Elena felt her heart slam against her ribs. Ethan pressed close to her side, his wide eyes watching his father climb the few steps to the stage. When Damien faced the crowd, the cameras flashed brighter. He let the silence linger, the kind of silence that demanded obedience. Then he spoke, his voice deep, resonant, carrying to every corner of the glittering hall. "Heard the whispers," he began. "I know what many of you think, that I've abandoned power for weakness, strategy for foolishness, that I've thrown away a partnership because of sentiment." The room tightened with anticipation. "You're right," he said simply. Gasps rippled like waves crashing. Damien's gaze swept the room, steady as steel. "I chose sentiment. I chose kindness. I chose my son's heart over the cold arithmetic of mergers. I chose the woman who has shown Ethan more love, more courage, and more dignity than any alliance could ever buy." He gestured toward Elena, who froze, every eye turning with his hand. "She has been mocked, slandered, called opportunist, and worse. But let me make this plain. Elena Hart is not the scandal, she is the standard by which I will measure every life in this house, in this family, from now on. If anyone cannot accept her, then they cannot accept me, nor my son." The hush was absolute. For one fragile moment, no one dared breathe. Then, a single clap rang out, sharp and deliberate. A man at the far table, an older philanthropist, leaned back and applauded. Slowly, others followed, though many did so stiffly, unwilling to stand against Damien's. Alina's throat tightened, tears blurring her vision. She had never wanted a spotlight, never sought grandeur. Yet here she was, held in it because Damien had thrust her into its blaze. Not to expose her, but to protect her. When he returned to the table, Ethan launched himself into his arms. "Daddy, you were brave," the boy whispered. Damien kissed the top of his son's head. "No, Ethan, we are brave." His eyes met Elena's across the child's dark hair. "All of us." The rest of the evening unfolded differently. Some guests, wary of Damien's fury, softened their tones when speaking to Elena. Others still sneered behind fans and glasses of wine. But the balance had shifted. No longer was she a shadow, something whispered about in cruel corners. She was beside Damien, inescapably part of his world. Later, as the gala wound down and the guests drifted toward carriages and limousines, Elena slipped onto a balcony to catch her breath. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks. She gripped the stone railing, the echo of Damien's words still shaking inside her. She felt a presence join her. Damien. His hand brushed hers, warm and firm. "She shouldn't have done that," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "I should have done it sooner," he replied. "The papers will twist it. They'll tear you apart for defending me." "Let them," he said. His gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. "I can withstand their words. What I cannot withstand is watching you doubt where you belong. Elena, look at me. You belong with us, with Ethan, with me." Her chest ached. She had fought for so long to remain in the background, to be nothing more than a caretaker. Yet the man before her, so often untouchable, was handing her something fragile, precious, and terrible. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, her voice breaking. Damien cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear that slid free. "Then lean on me until you are." Behind them, the soft patter of small feet approached. Ethan peeked onto the balcony, his eyes sleepy but curious. "Are you sad, Mama Elena?" She bent down, gathering him into her arms, burying her face in his soft hair. "No, sweetheart, not sad, just grateful." Damien placed a hand on both of them, holding them close. The city lights shimmered beyond the balcony, the world still hissing with scandal. But within that circle of three, something stronger had taken root. The storm outside might rage for weeks, perhaps months. Whispers might never vanish entirely. But for the first time, Elena felt not like a liability to Damien, not like an intruder in Ethan's fragile world, but like a part of something whole. And Damien knew, as he held them both, that whatever trials loomed ahead, this was the family he would fight for. The storm announced itself long before the first crack of thunder split the sky. Heavy clouds rolled in over the estate, pressing down with the weight of unspoken fears and whispered rumors. Rain lashed against the windows of Damien's mansion, streaking the glass with rivers that distorted the golden light inside. Outside, the world was chaos, but inside, the storm felt like an echo of everything they had endured these past weeks. For Damien, the weather was no longer just a nuisance of nature, it was a mirror of his own turmoil. Vanessa had not been silent. Though Damien had ended their engagement with finality, her claws still raked through the circles of power they both inhabited. She spread venomous words through society dinners, whispered threats in drawing rooms, and let scandal bloom in the tabloids. Headlines painted Elena as a schemer who had seduced her way into Damien's favor, a servant who clawed above her station. Friends and rivals alike questioned Damien's judgment. The most poisonous of them murmured that he was blinded by lust, not love. Damien carried the weight of it with the same stoic grace he carried everything. But the storm inside him grew. He was a man used to controlling the battlefield of business, where every move was calculated, every opponent predictable. But this was war of whispers and shadows. It pressed against him, bruising where it couldn't cut. For the first time in years, he feared. That night, as lightning streaked the horizon and thunder rattled the chandeliers, Damien found himself in the sitting room with Elena. She had insisted on staying, though she had every reason to run. She sat near the fire, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her dark hair loose, catching the flickering light. There was no pretense, no mask of strength. She looked tired yet unyielding, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. "You should have let me go," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the flames. Her voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. "The more I stay, the worse it becomes. For you, for Ethan. Vanessa won't stop until she's dragged all of us through the mud. I was never meant to stand in your world, Damien. I was meant to care for your son, not—" Her words pierced him deeper than any headline or whispered insult. Damien sat across from her, the firelight painting his face in stark relief. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked on hers. For a moment, he was silent, as if searching for words strong enough to break through her walls. When he spoke, his voice was low, stripped of the power that usually commanded boardrooms and negotiation. It was just a man's voice, raw and human. "Do you think I don't know the cost?" he asked. "Every day I feel the weight of it pressing down, the alliances I've lost, the doors that are closing. Vanessa's family controls networks that have been crucial to my work. By walking away, I may have invited ruin to my empire." He paused, his jaw tightening. "None of it matters when I look at my son and see the way he clings to you, when I hear him laugh again, when I see the light return to his eyes. You've given him more than I ever could, Elena. You've given him back his childhood." Her breath caught. She shook her head, fighting the emotion that rose in her throat. "That's just kindness, Damien. That's not love. And your world, your empire, how can you risk it for someone like me? I am no one. If society is right, I am just a servant who overstepped. I could never be the woman they expect at your side." Damien stood, pacing before the fire, as if the storm outside had driven him restless. Lightning flashed, throwing his tall frame into sharp relief, shadow and flame dancing over his shoulders. He turned back to her, his eyes fierce, his voice rough with a confession he had. "You think I care for their expectations? For their rules written by people who have never known love?" He stepped closer, his presence enveloping her, though he kept his hands clenched at his sides, as if afraid to touch. "Fear losing everything, Elena. I fear one day I'll wake up, and Ethan will be dragged into the shadows of their cruelty. I fear you'll decide it's too much and walk away, leaving us hollow again. I fear because for the first time since I buried Ethan's mother, I've found something worth protecting at any cost. And it's not my wealth, it's not my name, it's you. And him." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, unbidden and unstoppable. She had steeled herself against whispers, endured humiliation, faced her own doubts with quiet strength. But Damien's words broke something open inside her. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. For a long moment, silence hung heavy, filled only by the drumming rain and the fires. Finally, her voice broke through, softer than the storm, yet fierce with truth. "I love you, Damien." The words left her as if pulled from the deepest part of her. "I didn't mean to. I tried to bury it, to tell myself I was only here for Ethan, that it was just duty, just compassion. But I love you, and it terrifies me, because I know how fragile this is, how easily it can be torn apart. And because I don't believe I'm worthy of what you're giving me." For a heartbeat, Damien's breath caught. His walls crumbled with hers, the storm inside him breaking into something softer, something luminous. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his, pressing them against his chest as if to anchor her to his heartbeat. "You are more worthy than anyone I have ever known. Worthy because you've never asked for anything. Worthy because you love not with ambition, but with honesty. If I lose the world, so be it. I will not lose." Before Elena could answer, a soft sound interrupted them. Small footsteps padded into the room, hesitant but insistent. Ethan stood in the doorway, his pajamas rumpled, his hair sticking up in a halo from sleep. He clutched his blanket with one hand, his other hand curled into a fist. The storm had woken him, but his eyes were wide with something deeper. He had heard enough. Slowly, Ethan walked forward, his small feet padding against the rug. He stopped between them, looking up first at his father, then at Elena. His lower lip trembled, as if he carried the weight of their fears too. Then, without a word, he lifted his free hand and offered it. Tiny, fragile, but steady. His voice was no louder than the whisper of rain. "Family," he said. The word pierced deeper than any thunderclap. Elena's tears spilled freely as she pressed her hand over Ethan's. Damien's chest heaved, breaking under the force of love and resolve. He wrapped his arms around them both, drawing them close as if shielding them not only from the storm outside, but from the world that waited beyond tomorrow. Wind howled, rattling the windows, lightning searing the sky, but within the circle of their embrace, warmth spread like fire, steady and unyielding. The storm raged on, but in that room, for the first time, Damien knew peace. He whispered, his voice fierce and unshakable. "Together. We face it together." The storm raged through the night, relentless and unyielding, as though determined to break through the mansion's fortified walls. Every crash of thunder seemed to mirror the chaos Damien carried inside. Every streak of lightning a reminder of how swiftly fortunes and alliances could be shattered. But within the private lounge where he, Elena, and Ethan sat, the atmosphere was changing, fragile, delicate, but undeniably warmer. Damien had spoken words he never imagined admitting aloud, his fear of losing everything and his refusal to turn from the truth of what he now felt for her. It had left Elena breathless, her lips parted, her eyes shimmering with emotions she had long denied herself. He was not the man she once believed him to be, a distant, untouchable figure of wealth and power. He was a father who bled for his child, a man torn between two worlds, willing to risk one for the sake of the other. Her heart trembled as she looked at him, and finally, in a voice soft but unwavering, she confessed what she had buried beneath layers of restraint. She told him she had grown to love, not with the infatuation of someone dazzled by wealth, but with the steady, aching devotion of someone who had seen his flaws, his pain, and still found beauty there. But with the admission came her. She said she was unworthy of his world, that she could never stand in the gleaming halls of high society without dragging him down further into scandal. Damien's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightening at her words. He leaned closer, his gaze unflinching. "Do you not see?" he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of sincerity. "It is your very humility, your strength, your grace that makes you worthy. Status has stripped compassion from too many around me. But you," his voice fripted for a moment, "but you remind me what it means to live, to love, to be more than a name and a fortune." Elena swallowed, her lashes heavy with unshed tears. For so long, she had carried the belief that love was for others, for those who belonged, not for her. But the intensity in his voice, the fire in his eyes, cracked that shield. Before she could answer, the smallest voice cut through the tension. Ethan had crept forward, his little face glowing faintly from the lamplight. His small hand reached out, trembling slightly, as if uncertain whether the gesture was too bold. With eyes wide and innocent, he offered both Damien and Elena his tiny hand. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried the power of a vow. "Family." The word fell into the room like a prayer, fragile yet unbreakable. Damien inhaled sharply, emotions surging like a wave too strong to contain. He reached out immediately, enveloping Ethan's hand with his own larger one. Elena hesitated, her breath catching, but then moved by something greater than fear, she placed her hand gently atop theirs. Three hands, different in size, shape, and strength, bound by something invisible yet stronger than any alliance Vanessa's family could have offered. Thunder boomed again, but this time none of them flinched. Instead, warmth spread between them, a bond that seemed to shield them from the storm itself. Damien looked at Elena, then at his son, and the words came without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan," he said softly, his voice trembling but resolute. "Family, from this night forward, nothing will break us apart." The storm clawed at the windows, the rain lashing in furious sheets, but the three of them stayed there, hand in hand, unmoving. Elena's tears spilled freely now, but for the first time they were not born of fear or loneliness. They were born of a fragile hope, a belief that maybe, against all odds, she had found a place she could belong. Hours passed, and though the storm refused to relent, the night within shifted into a softer rhythm. Elena helped Ethan settle into a blanket, humming quietly as he drifted into slumber. Damien stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the flashes of lightning. He turned to watch Elena, the sight of her gently tucking his son in, filling his chest with something he had not felt in years. When Ethan was asleep, Elena rose and moved to Damien's side. They stood together, silent for a moment, listening to the roar outside. Finally, Damien spoke, his voice heavy but certain. "Vanessa will not stop. She will twist every word, poison every ear, By the tomorrow, more doors will close, but I cannot regret what I have chosen tonight." Elena turned to him, her brow furrowed with quiet worry. "You shouldn't lose everything for me." Damien faced her, his eyes fierce. "I would lose kingdoms before I'd allow my son to be broken, or you to walk away. Wealth and alliances are worthless if the cost is my soul." Her breath hitched, her heart pounding at his words. She had thought herself unworthy, but in that moment, she realized he did not see her as a burden. He saw her as his anchor, the only one who kept him tethered when the world tried to tear him apart. The storm outside raged like a beast, but Damien lifted his hand and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away a stray tear. "We will face it together," he promised, his tone low but unshakable. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into his touch, her body trembling with the depth of her feelings. "Together," she whispered. For the rest of the night, as the storm hammered on, they remained side by side. They did not know what dawn would bring, the venom of Vanessa's whispers, the cruelty of society, the battles they had yet to fight. But within that storm-battered house, they had found something neither expected, a shelter not made of stone and walls, but of trust, of tenderness, and of love slowly beginning to bloom. When morning finally arrived, the rain had lessened, though the skies were still heavy with clouds. Yet within the mansion, the air was different. Ethan awoke to find his father and Elena still close, their hands brushing as though afraid to let go. He smiled sleepily, clutching the pendant he had made with his small hands, now tucked safely against Elena's neck. For Ethan, it was enough. For Damien and Elena, it was a beginning. The storm outside had passed, but the greater storm of scandal and revenge loomed on the horizon. And yet, as the three of them shared a quiet breakfast, laughter slipping softly between the clatter of dishes and the hum of the world awakening, there was a sense that, whatever came, they would endure it. Because the storm had not broken them, it had bound them closer. Word did not forget Damien's scandal overnight. Weeks later, whispers still followed him wherever he went. Headlines screamed in bold letters about the millionaire who had broken an engagement with one of the most powerful socialites in the country, trading influence for a mere nanny. The papers framed it as reckless, humiliating, even insane. But what stung the most was how Elena's name became the punchline of every cruel article. They painted her as a manipulator, a schemer who had set her sights on Damien from the very beginning. They called her the Cinderella imposter, mocking the very idea that someone from her background could ever be worthy of the Blackwood name. Elena stopped reading after the first few stories, but the damage was done. Everywhere she turned, she felt eyes on her, some curious, some pitied, many filled with. The Blackwood mansion, once her refuge, now felt like a gilded cage. The staff treated her kindly, though she suspected some still wondered how long she would last. At night, Elena lay awake, questioning whether staying was truly helping Damien or hurting him more. More than once, she drafted a letter of resignation, telling herself she could vanish quietly, slip back into the world she came from, and free Damien from the weight of gossip. But each time she thought of leaving, Ethan's small arms would tighten around her neck, and her resolve would shatter. Damien noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her smile dimmed whenever she caught sight of a newspaper headline. He knew she was struggling, but he also knew words alone would not convince her. He would need to show her, in a way no rumor could undermine, that she was more than a scandal in his life. The opportunity came when invitations arrived for the upcoming gala, hosted by the Whitmores, one of the most influential families in the city. The event was a cornerstone of high society, covered by every tabloid, every magazine, every gossip column. Damien knew exactly what it would mean if he brought Elena and Ethan with him. It would silence whispers or ignite them into fire, but either way, it would make his choice unshakably clear. On the evening of the gala, the mansion hummed with preparations. Elena stood in her modest room, staring at the gown laid out on the bed. Damien had arranged everything, soft ivory fabric, simple yet elegant, with a satin ribbon that seemed to whisper of grace rather than grandeur. But Elena's hands trembled as she reached for it. She imagined the crowd of glittering eyes waiting to dissect her every movement, every flaw, the whispers she would hear, the sneers. She turned to Damien as he entered, his tailored suit making him look every inch the commanding figure the world admired. "To go," she whispered. "Damien, they'll tear you apart. They'll tear Ethan apart. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands, steadying them. His voice was low, firm, filled with quiet conviction. Let them talk. Let them sneer. I won't hide the people who matter most to me. Tonight, Elena, I want them to see who you are, not who the papers say you are. And if anyone dares insult you, they'll answer to me. Her eyes searched his, desperate for certainty. For a moment, she saw the same fear reflected in him. Fear of rejection, of loss, of defiance turning into isolation. But then he brushed his thumb across her knuckles and gave her the smallest, most tender smile. And in that moment, she understood. He wasn't walking into that gala for society's approval. He was walking in for her. For Ethan, for the truth of what they had begun to build. The ballroom was alive with light when they arrived. Chandeliers glittered above a sea of silk gowns and crisp tuxedos. Conversations buzzed like restless bees, all halting the moment Damien Blackwood stepped through the grand doors. All eyes turned to him, then slid to the woman at his side and the small boy holding her hand. Whispers rippled instantly. Some gasped, others sneered. "That's her," voices hissed. "The nanny? How shameless. He actually brought her here?" Elena felt her cheeks burn, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out the music. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the floor, but Ethan's little hand tightened in hers. He was nervous too, his shy eyes darting around the crowded room. She knelt down quickly, brushing a reassuring hand over his dark hair. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just hold my hand. We'll get through this together." When she stood, Damien placed his hand firmly at the small of her back, his posture radiating authority. He walked them through the sea of stairs as if nothing in the world could shake him. Guests parted reluctantly, eyes wide with shock at his brazenness. He introduced Elena with dignity, his tone calm but unyielding. "This is Elena. She is part of my household, and this," he looked down with pride as Ethan clung to Elena, "is my son. They belong with me." Gasps erupted. Some choked on their champagne, others muttered in disbelief. But before any reaction could settle, something happened that silenced the entire room. Ethan, shy little Ethan who had once hidden behind shadows, suddenly looked up at Elena with wide eyes. His lips trembled, as if wrestling with courage. Then, in a small but clear voice, he said, "Mama." The word pierced the ballroom louder than the orchestra. A hush fell, suffocating, stunned. Glasses stilled mid-air. Jaws dropped. The child who had clung only to silence had just declared something the entire world was not prepared to hear. Elena froze, her heart hammering. Tears welled instantly in her eyes as she looked down at Ethan, unable to believe he had said it aloud, here of all places. She knelt again, pulling him into her arms, her voice shaking. "Oh, Ethan." Damien's breath caught in his chest. For a moment, the world tilted, his vision blurring with unexpected tears. He reached down, his large hand covering both Elena's and Ethan's, anchoring them together. When he looked up, his voice was steady but his heart thundered with emotion. "You heard him," he said to the stunned crowd. "My son has chosen who his mother is, and I will never deny him that. Not for power, not for appearances, not for anyone." The room was silent, the air thick with disbelief. For the first time in years, Damien felt liberated, not as a businessman, not as a fiancé, not as a figure of wealth, but as a father, a man, someone who had chosen truth over pretense. And as he stood there, his arm around Elena, Ethan safe between them, the whispers lost their power. What mattered was not the glittering stairs of society, but the fragile, undeniable bond that had been declared in front of the world. The silence in the ballroom stretched long, broken only by the faint hum of the orchestra struggling to find its rhythm again. But the damage, or perhaps the victory, was already done. In one small word, Ethan had shifted the narrative, ripping away the last facade Damien had clung to. Vanessa's friends, clustered near the champagne bar, exchanged shocked looks. One of them hissed, "It's humiliating. He's parading a servant like royalty." Another whispered, "No, it's worse. He believes it." Yet not all eyes were filled with scorn. A few softened, touched by the child's bravery, by the tenderness in Damien's stance. Older matrons nodded almost approvingly, as though recognizing something genuine that society had long buried beneath jewels and pride. Damien did not wait for their judgment. He straightened his shoulders and guided Elena and Ethan toward the center of the room. His voice, when he spoke, carried the calm weight of a man who had already chosen his path. "I know what you think of me," he said. "That I've thrown away status, alliances, appearances? Perhaps I have, but what I have gained is more valuable than every title combined. For too long I measured my worth by power. Tonight, I choose something different. I choose love, and if you call that weakness, then so be it." A murmur rolled through the room, some disapproving, some quietly admiring. The Whitmores, hosts of the gala, exchanged uncertain glances, calculating what this declaration would mean for them. But Damien no longer cared. For the first time, he was not living for their approval. Beside him, Elena stood trembling, but her chin lifted high. She expected condemnation, perhaps even to be asked to leave, but instead, Damien's words wrapped around her like armor. For once, she was not just surviving gossip, she was standing inside a shield built by his unflinching loyalty. Ethan, small and brave, leaned closer into Elena's arms, his face half-gritted, but his trust absolute. That trust became the anchor in the storm, reminding Damien of the promise he had made, to never let fear or pride come before his son's happiness. The evening ended with more whispers than laughter, but Damien did not waver. He escorted Elena and Ethan home, ignoring the murmurs that followed them out. When the heavy doors of the mansion closed behind them, a silence fell that felt sacred, untouched by society's judgment. Ethan scampered toward the parlor, clutching the stuffed bear Elena had mended for him weeks ago. He hummed softly, something he had never dared do in public before. Elena stood in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. "I've given him back his smile," Damien said quietly, stepping beside her. She shook her head. "No, you did by standing up for him, by standing up for us." For a long moment, they simply watched Ethan play. The house, once cold and vast, seemed to glow faintly with warmth. Laughter echoed faintly from the child's lips, filling spaces that had long been hollow. So in that moment, both Damien and Elena realized that, though society might still call them a scandal, they had already begun building something rarer than wealth: a home. Over the following days, the tabloids exploded with headlines. "Blackwood declares love over power," one read. Another snarled, "Millionaire ruins legacy for a nanny." The stories painted Damien as reckless, Elena as conniving, Ethan as pitiable. Yet behind the closed gates of the Blackwood estate, none of it seemed to matter as much. Damien arranged more time away from the boardroom, choosing instead to be present at home. He joined Ethan and Elena in the garden, even enduring the clumsy tea parties his son orchestrated. He watched as Ethan's laughter grew freer, his voice bolder, until the boy who had once shrunk from the world began to step into it with renewed courage. For Elena, every day was both gift and trial. Strangers still stared when she ventured into town, still whispered cruelly behind gloved hands. But when she returned to the mansion, Ethan's joy and Damien's quiet, unwavering presence reminded her why she stayed. Slowly, piece by piece, the fear that she would never belong began to fade. One evening, as rain pattered against the tall windows, Damien found Elena in the library, surrounded by shelves of books too rich for her past life to imagine. She was reading aloud to Ethan, her voice soft, steady, melodic. The boy leaned against her shoulder, already drifting into sleep. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching, his chest tightening with emotions he could no longer name. This simple picture of peace was worth every storm. And though trials still loomed beyond the gates, inside these walls he had already won. When Elena looked up and saw him, she smiled faintly. It was a fragile smile, but one that carried strength. "He called me Mama again tonight," she whispered. Damien crossed the room, resting a hand over hers, lowering his voice so as not to wake the child. "That's because you are." Their eyes met, the unspoken truth hovering between them like a vow. Outside, the world still doubted, but inside, in the warmth of their laughter and the courage of a child's word, they had found something indestructible. And though society still judged them, The cold mansion that once echoed with emptiness was no longer a place of silence. It was becoming, at last, a home filled with life, with laughter, with love. The weeks passed, carrying with them the whispers of scandal, the storms of doubt, and the trials of a society that refused to let go of its rigid chains. But through it all, Damien, Elena, and Ethan had stood together, fragile at times, uncertain at others, but never apart. The mansion that once echoed with silence and cold grandeur now rang with new life. Ethan's laughter bounced off marble floors, his little footsteps, Elena's quiet voice, soothing and warm, filled rooms with a sense of comfort that wealth could never purchase. And Damien found himself reborn, his heart tethered not to his empire or reputation, but to the fragile thread of love he'd nearly missed. Now the season had turned. It was late spring, the kind where the air carried a gentle warmth and the gardens came alive in shades of green and gold. Damien had arranged for the afternoon to be quiet, shielded from the eyes of those who still craved gossip and spectacle. In his private garden, where roses bloomed in soft blushes of pink and red, he prepared for a moment that would. Ethan was already running barefoot across the grass, his laughter carried by the breeze. For so long, the boy's steps had been hesitant, his spirit guarded by silence. But now he ran freely, as if the earth itself cheered him on, as if every shadow had finally lifted from his small frame. His cheeks flushed with joy, his arms stretched wide like wings. Elena sat on a stone bench nearby, her eyes following Ethan with tender affection. Her dress was simple, cream-colored, glowing softly with the wind. There was no trace of the servant society had cruelly named her, only the quiet radiance of a woman who had found courage and love. Yet her eyes, when they shifted to Damien, betrayed a lingering disbelief. She had grown accustomed to giving without expecting, to caring without being chosen in return. Even now, with Damien at her side, her heart whispered fears. Was this truly hers to keep, or was it a fragile dream that might dissolve like mist at dawn? Damien approached her slowly, his footsteps measured, his expression one of calm resolve. He wore no mask, no polished armor of the tycoon the world knew him to be. Here, he was simply a man, stripped bare, before the woman and child who had healed him. In his hand was a small velvet box, the weight of it both terrifying and liberating. "Clement," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She turned to him, brows slightly furrowed, her lips parting as though to question the gravity in his tone. He knelt before her, not with the arrogance of a man used to power, but with the humility of someone offering his soul. The velvet box trembled slightly in his hand as he opened it, revealing not one, but two delicate rings, their gold catching the sunlight. Her breath caught. "Damien, what are you—" He silenced her gently with his gaze, not stern, but steady, the kind of look that carried promises deeper than words. "This is not only for you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's for Ethan too, because I cannot ask for your heart without also promising myself to his." Elena's throat tightened, her hands trembling on her lap. By now, Ethan had slowed his steps, curiosity drawing him closer. His little eyes widened at the sight of Damien on one knee, the box glowing softly in the golden afternoon. "Papa?" he whispered, the word still tender, still new on his tongue. Damien extended one of the rings toward him. "Ethan," he said gently, "may I be your father, not just in name but in every way that matters?" The boy blinked, confusion warring with the innocence of his hope. Then, as though the meaning had washed over him all at once, his small body trembled. Tears gathered in his wide eyes, spilling down his cheeks as he rushed forward. His tiny hands clutched Damien's, his voice breaking in a sob that was both joy and relief. "Yes. Yes, Papa." The sound of it cracked something open in Damien's chest, something he had never known he carried. For years he had faced boardrooms with iron will, had silenced rivals with sharp words and colder stares. But never had he been undone like this, by a child's trembling acceptance, by the raw, unguarded need in Ethan's embrace. He pulled the boy close, burying his face in his hair, whispering against. Elena pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. Her heart felt as though it might shatter from the weight of the moment. She had carried Ethan's loneliness in her arms, had prayed in silence for the day he might feel whole again. And now, before her eyes, the boy had not only claimed a father, but gifted Damien the family he had been starved of. But Damien was not finished. He turned back to her, his hand still steady, even as his voice wavered with emotion. "Elena," he said, his gaze locking on hers, "I once believed empires were built with wealth and power, but I was wrong. They were built with love, with the courage to choose what truly matters. You and Ethan are my empire. Will you allow me the honor of building the rest of my life with you?" Her vision blurred with tears. For so long she had been told she was less, that she was undeserving, that her place was to serve from the shadows. And yet, here he was, Damien Blackwood, the man whose very name had commanded fear and respect, kneeling before her as though she was the crown he sought. Her voice broke when she finally spoke. I never believed something like this could be mine." "And it is," he said fiercely, his hand trembling as he held out the second ring. "It's yours, Elena, if you'll take it." For a heartbeat, silence enveloped the garden. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Elena lowered her hand from her lips, letting it tremble freely as she reached toward him. "Yes," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried the force of years of longing finally fulfilled. "Yes, Damien. Yes." The sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the three of them as Damien slid the ring onto her finger. Ethan, still clutching his father's hand, leaned against Elena's side, his small voice breaking into a joyful cry. "Mama, Papa, we're a family now." Damien gathered them both into his arms, pulling them into an embrace that felt like a vow, sealed not with signatures or contracts, but with the unshakable truth of love. His voice was hoarse when he whispered into their hair, "No fortune, no empire, no power will ever matter more than this moment. You are my everything, both of you." And for the first time in years, the garden was not just a place of beauty, but a sanctuary of hope. The embrace lingered, long and unbroken, as if none of them dared to let go. For Ethan, the world had always been too big, too cold, too loud. Yet in that embrace, he felt small in the best way, protected, cherished, and finally whole. For Elena, whose life had been marked by quiet sacrifices, it was a moment of triumph, not over others, but over the belief that she would never be chosen. And for Damien, the man who had stood atop towers of wealth only to discover how empty they were, it was salvation. Time itself seemed to pause, wrapping the garden in a golden silence. Birds flitted from tree to tree, their songs weaving softly into the air. The roses swayed gently, their petals catching the light like tiny flames. And at the heart of it all stood a man, a woman, and a child, bound not by circumstance, but by choice. Damien finally drew back, his hands still resting on their shoulders, as though afraid they might vanish if he released them. He studied Elena's tear-streaked face, then Ethan's flushed cheeks, and felt something he had never allowed himself before. Peace. "I spent my life chasing things that never filled me," he admitted, his voice carrying the weight of confession. "But today, I stand before the only treasures that matter. No title,